Hi, my name is Gail Emma Scott, and I am reading from my novel Double Lives. And it is set in Texas in the mid 1970s. I'm reading chapter by chapter, so we are now on chapter 9 of 34 chapters. Here we go. Chapter 9, Paying the Price. Golden beams of late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the mansion where the acceptance envelope arrived. Dawn smoothed the thick paper between nervous fingers, feeling its embossed seal pulse like a tiny heartbeat against her palm. All through dinner, she rehearsed what she would say to her father, but when the dishes were cleared, the house was quiet, she could delay no longer. She walked down the long corridor, each footstep echoing on polished marble, and stopped at the heavy oak door of Willy's study. She knocked. Silence, then a grudging bark of permission. She eased inside, heart pounding. Willy sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk stacked with sermon notes and mailing list printouts. His lamp cast a halo over the silver threads at his temples, but his eyes held no warmth. Dawn bowed her head, approached, and placed the acceptance letter before him. He examined it carefully, frowned, then looked up at his middle daughter. "What did you do?" His voice curled like smoke. "Apply to that snooty private school? Didn't I tell you you're staying put in public school?" "Daddy, please. Public school is a madhouse. Fights break out every day, and the teachers have stopped trying. I'm not learning anything." "I'll tell you what you can learn and what you can't. You can't learn to siphon my money for tuition." He tapped the letter edge on the desk. "If I pay for you, Mandy's heathen college will be next. If you want it so bad, you pay." "Fine, I'll get a job," Dawn said quietly. Willy's laugh was equal parts ridicule and disbelief. "You can't cover those bills flipping burgers." "I'll find a way. Just, do I have your permission?" "You're not getting a cent out of me." He dismissed her with a brisk wave and bent toward his paperwork. For a moment, Dawn thought her father might look up, might soften just a little. Instead, the scratch of his pen was louder than her own pounding heart. She realized with a jolt that to him, she was just another distraction, no different from the mail piled on his desk. Beads of sweat emerged on Dawn's forehead as she backed out of the study. The door clicked shut, and with that soft sound, something inside her flared, equal parts hurt and resolve. A week later, Dawn sat in the headmaster's paneled office explaining her finances with her cheeks burning. The academy offered a partial scholarship, but she still needed the remainder to enroll. Determined not to let embarrassment derail her goal, Dawn scoured the Sunday classifieds that afternoon and found an opening at Rosewood Nursing Home, $1 more than minimum wage. She did the math. If she landed the job and worked a whole summer, then juggled shifts after classes first semester began, she'd be able to pay the tuition bill. On the Rosewood job application, she wrote only Dawn Elizabeth. Mentioning her last name would invite curiosity, curiosity that would lead back to Willy Briggs, the televangelist who thundered across American airwaves. She kept the mansion and its ballroom-sized foyer out of the conversation, slid the application form across the desk, and prayed the hiring manager examining it wouldn't ask any questions that would make her feel even more awkward than she already felt. To her astonishment and delight, she got the job. Training was a 2-week blur of instructional videos and rushed demonstrations in a drab classroom. Then came her first day of real on the job training. with actual patience. Dawn stepped gingerly into the nursing home's main elevator, feeling nervous as the doors slid shut behind her. She inhaled, bracing herself, but nothing prepared her for the smell that slammed her senses when the doors opened on the second floor. A sour blend of antiseptic, urine, and something even more foul. Her stomach churned. Directly ahead of her, a rail-thin woman slumped in a wheelchair, staring at carpet swirls as though they held prophecies. In the corner, an old man tugged at his pants, drooling and cursing an enemy visible only to him. Wheelchairs clogged the hallway like abandoned carts at a discount store, each holding a fragile body, bent by time. A nurse hurried past, rolling an IV pole on wheels, and Dawn felt a sudden urge to bolt back into the elevator. She imagined her father standing there, his voice booming about honoring the elderly, while his rings gleamed under stage lights. Would the last 5 minutes in this hallway of soiled hospital gowns and forgotten faces, would he last 5 minutes in this hallway of soiled hospital gowns and forgotten faces? Dawn clenched her fists, determined to stick with it. She straightened her shoulders and made her way to the nurse's station. The head nurse, buxom, heavily powdered, and radiating fatigue, looked Dawn up and down, then thrust a clipboard into her hands. 18 patients, you'll toilet them, push fluids, feed, bathe, pull dentures, brush gums, and put them to bed. Her words rolled out in a monotone. An orderly will show you around today. Tomorrow you'll be on your own. She leaned into the hallway and bellowed, Alan! A handsome young man with a mop of dark curls emerged from the laundry room, pushing a cart of linens. Dawn noticed the Star of David pendant half hidden beneath his scrubs. He glanced at her, quickly away, then nodded to the nurse. Dawn's palms grew sweaty. Her father's sermons denouncing fraternizing with boys rang in her head. Willy's tirades against Christ-killing Jews still rang in her ears. Yet the quiet intensity in Alan's brown eyes felt oddly reassuring. For the first time in a long while, Dawn felt something stir within her that wasn't fear or shame. Alan's calm gaze was the opposite of Willy's blazing glare, steady instead of scorching. It unsettled her, but it also drew her closer. Show her the ropes, the nurse ordered, then lumbered off. Alan gestured for Dawn to follow. He opened the linen closet. Tattered towels and stained hospital gowns spilled from crooked shelves. Welcome to glamorous gowns, Alan said dryly. Let's see your list. Patient by patient, room by room, Alan introduced her to Rosewood's residents. Gladys, who screamed if anyone touched her left arm. Reuben, who insisted he'd been robbed of his fortune and shouted for his lawyer most nights around 11. Bernadette, who would only eat if you sang hymns to her between spoonfuls. Have you worked here long? Dawn asked, struggling to memorize the patients' names and faces. A year. It doesn't take long to map out the place. By 6 o'clock, carts arrived stacked with dinner trays. Alan marked which patients needed spoon feeding. Dawn approached Bernadette, forcing a smile. The woman's small mouth trembled, opening barely wide enough for 3 peas. Dawn coaxed in a small spoonful of mashed potatoes. A moment later, warm paste splattered Dawn's arm, making her shiver, half from revulsion, half from despair. Bernadette giggled. She does that, Alan said. Sorry, forgot to warn you. Fatigue and frustration built up within Dawn with each passing hour and every new task. Some patients clawed at her wrists when she tried to bathe them. Others shrieked as she tried to remove their clothing and pull on their nightgowns. Cigarette smoke drifted down above the heads of nurses' aides as they gossiped in the break room, while Dawn had to remain on duty, wrestling immobile bodies into bathing lifts. Every fiber of her being screamed against the injustice of it all. Why had these lives been reduced to this assembly line? And why did it feel normal to everyone but her? Inside room 214, Dawn struggled to remove a set of dentures from the mouth of a patient named Wilma. The patient snarled, teeth clamped. Dawn's fingers slipped, and Wilma bit down hard, drawing a yelp. Alan appeared in the doorway. Hey there, Dawn. She probably just didn't want a stranger's fingers in her mouth, he said gently. If she wants to sleep with her teeth in, let her. It's not worth the war. You've got to pick your battles around here. That's right, Wilma croaked triumphantly. Alan switched on the room's TV and flipped through a few channels. Wilma perked up. The Willy Loves You show, please. Willy calms me. Yes, Wilma, I know, Alan said. You tell me that every night. Dawn froze as her father's face filled the screen. Sweat shining, rings flashing. His familiar cadence thundered through the tiny room. God sent AIDS to warn us. This mysterious disease is a punishment for our sins. The camera panned to weeping, nodding congregants. That man sure can preach, Alan said. I've never seen anything like it at my temple. I signed my whole will over to Willy's ministry, Wilma said proudly. When I go up to heaven to be with the Lord, my money and all my earthly possessions will save a lot of souls. Dawn's throat tightened. She wanted to shout the truth, that Willy's ministry had more money than it could ever spend, that her father's empire thrived on checks from the frail and the elderly. Instead, Dawn swallowed her fury. To speak up would be to expose herself. Looking at Wilma, who was totally captivated by her father's fiery sermon, Dawn wondered, how much cash is flooding into my father's ministry? Enough to cover my tuition 1,000 times over. Yet here I am, wiping mashed potatoes off my arm. Dawn glanced around in the cluttered room, taking in its peeling wallpaper and cracked linoleum floors. Shame and anger rose up within her, bitter and hot. I wonder what the preacher's really like, Alan said. I mean, what the special sauce that makes him so popular. No idea, Dawn said flatly. I don't watch much TV. She fled the room, passing door after door. To her, it seemed that every television and the face of every bedridden patient was lit up by Willy's fervor. It felt as though her father's gaze followed her down the hall. She picked up her pace, heart pounding. In Hazel's room, Dawn peeled back the bed covers and reached for the transfer belt. Come on, bedtime, Hazel. Not till Willy finishes, Hazel said, eyes glued to the TV, gnarled hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. Willy was in full-on crying mode now, arms raised as testimonies poured in. Dawn's patience snapped. She clicked off the set. What are you doing? Hazel rolled forward and clawed for the TV knob as though for life itself. I'll read to you from your Bible. You can't read it like Willy. Turn it back on or I'll scream. Hazel's threat lasted seconds before she let out a piercing shriek. Hazel, please. Willy is not God. How would you know? The devil's in you. Hazel started hollering, help me! Help, Satan's in here! Footsteps thundered down the hallway. The head nurse barreled in, demanding to know what the ruckus was all about. Satan! He's in that girl! Hazel wailed. The nurse turned to Dawn. What did you do? I turned off her TV. More than that, Hazel screeched. She turned off Pastor Willy Briggs. The nurse flicked the set back on. Willy's voice flooded the room again. Grabbing Dawn by the arm, the nurse pulled her into the hallway. Never do that again, she snapped. Our residents live for that show. Some donate all their earthly possessions to that ministry. And why shouldn't they? Their families never visit. They need hope. Willy gives it to them. So keep your opinions to yourself. Personally, that man brought me to Christ and helped me lose 5 pounds praying for appetite control. And don't badmouth him ever again. She stomped away, hips swaying. Dawn leaned against the cool wall, pulse racing. For the first time, Dawn realized just how far her father's reach extended. Even more, even here, among nurses with weary eyes and patients who barely remembered their own names, Willy was a presence, untouchable and adored. She felt smaller than ever, realizing no corner of the world was safe from her father. What was that all about? Alan said, emerging from a patient's room. Willy Briggs, you fought with the head nurse over a TV preacher? Why? I don't know, Dawn whispered. I feel love and hate all at once. That's odd, he said gently. Dawn was desperate to change the subject. She glanced at her watch. We clock out in 5 minutes. How do you get home? I walk. Me too. Which direction? Toward the lake. I'll walk you home. The streets aren't safe this late. Fine, but you'll have to stop 2 blocks before my door. Seeing his confusion, Dawn added, my father doesn't like me talking to boys. Not even a nice Jewish boy? Alan said, half smiling. To be honest, my dad says Jews crucified Jesus, so they'll all burn in hell. Sounds like that TV preacher. Yeah, what a weird coincidence. Dawn's cheeks burned once more, but now with defiance rather than shame. By the end of June, Dawn had finished submitting the scholarship forms to the private school's financial aid office and had switched to the evening shift so she could log more hours. The nursing home's corridors felt cooler at night, and the fluorescent lights overhead steeped everything in anemic blue glow. Yet the hush brought no peace. Moans and coughs slipped beneath half-closed doors like restless ghosts. Alan walked Dawn home most evenings, always halting 2 blocks shy of the wrought iron gate guarding the Briggs family estate. They talked about the strong personalities and quirks of their favorite patients, about favorite novelists, his John Steinbeck, hers Jane Austen, and about their dreams for the future. Though their conversations were tentative at first, they deepened and grew more exciting and engaging as they got to know each other. At Alan's unusual turnaround spot, Dawn would thank him for walking her home. Sometimes she lingered at the mansion gate to watch Alan's silhouette fade into the darkness down the oak-lined street. Then she'd walk up the long, winding driveway in silence, thinking about the joyful way Alan's eyes lit up as he talked, and the way his dark curls framed his handsome face. With school out for the summer, Dawn worked double shifts whenever a fellow staff member called in sick. By 11 at night, most residents were fast asleep, and she could sit down at the nurse's station to rest her aching feet and adjust her sagging ponytail. Sometimes when the nurses were elsewhere, Dawn would page through patient charts. She was surprised to discover that a former bank president shared a room with a bankrupt taxi driver, and that the widow of a big-time corporate lawyer shared a room with a former prostitute. At 17, Dawn learned the truth. Fortunes can evaporate quickly under the weight of monthly invoices. $3,000 for skilled care here, $800 for physical therapy there, a pharmacy bill that reads like the fine print on a mortgage statement. Wealth's illusion of permanency collapsed under the weight of a nursing home's billing ledger. Engrossed in reading charts and pondering the lives of her patients, Dawn was startled from time to time by a sudden outburst down the hall. She's got no feet. That's what she says, Clara hollered one night, thrashing the stumps that remained after her long ago amputation. Dawn tried soothing her with gentle words, but Clara's ramblings shifted from one topic to another like radio static, Montevallo, good people, something about trains arriving late. When Dawn pressed for meaning, Clara stared right through her. Another resident insisted a fire hydrant outside was a shivering child abandoned in the rain. Dawn drew the curtain shut, but the woman shuffled on stiff legs, chanting, 1, 2, 3, time to go, as she clutched at imaginary suitcases. Rosewood, Dawn concluded, was a theater where reality wore ill fitting costumes, slipping in and out of scenes without warning. Dawn began journaling between tasks, sketching quick character portraits. Matilda, who polished her wedding ring daily, though her husband had been buried for 20 years. Oscar, who tried to tip Dawn a nickel after every bed change, whispering, "Buy yourself a soda, sweet girl." It helped Dawn fight the dehumanizing rush of bathe, feed, change, repeat imposed by the daily care schedule. Yet no journal entry prepared her for death. It happened on an August evening, shadowed by thunderclouds. Dawn had just finished tucking in the last patient on her list when the call light above room 207 flashed red. She hurried in, but Ruben's chest no longer rose. His fingers, once nimble enough to demonstrate card tricks between doses of morphine, curled stiffly over the blanket's edge. Heart pounding from panic, Dawn sprinted down the hall to the nursing station. The head nurse, lipstick smudged from a lukewarm cup of coffee, took the report with unsettling calm. The nurse scribbled "expired" on the chart and instructed Dawn to bathe the body and prepare it for transport. Then she returned to doing paperwork, as though she'd merely ordered a linen change. Dawn returned to the dark room, bracing herself to bathe a corpse for the first time. She heard the mechanical hiss of the ventilator as it exhaled its final blast of air. The television had been left on low volume. Willy's face filled the screen, preaching about the glorious homecoming day. His voice bounced off the walls. "We'll leave these bothersome bodies and rise by the power and glory of his mighty hand into the clouds." Her skin crawled. Dawn muted the TV, but could still see her father's lips moving as he conjured up images of souls streaking heavenward like fireworks. She dampened a cloth and wiped Reuben's brow, rubbery and cool. Two marble-like eyes stared at her, reflecting the light from the silent television. Dawn's hands trembled. The person who had loved John Wayne movies and Glenn Miller records had vanished, leaving only cartilage and bone. She reached for some fresh towels when a sudden twitch rippled through the corpse's arm. A washcloth fell from her grasp. A primal sound erupted from her throat, an unrecognizable hybrid of gasp and cry, and she staggered backward, knocking a tray of mouth swabs to the floor. Alan appeared in the doorway moments later, drawn by the clatter. "What?" Dawn threw her arms around him, terrified. "The body just moved." Alan tightened his arms around her. "That's normal," he whispered calmly. "Death causes muscle spasms. Just electrical echoes fading in flesh. Don't worry. It's just biology playing out its final script." Hearing the clicking sound of authoritative footsteps coming down the hall, they separated quickly. "Who screamed?" demanded the head nurse, filling the doorframe. Dawn stammered a confession. The nurse rolled her eyes. "Alan, you know what to do," the nurse said. "Show this new girl how it's done. She must have slept through the training session about post-mortem care. I'll call down to the morgue." "The morgue," Dawn whispered to Alan as soon as the nurse had left. "It's just a room down in the basement." Alan spread his clean It's just a room down in the basement. Alan spread a clean sheet over the body. "A room that smells like disinfectant and inevitability." Dawn stared at the shrouded figure. the silence in the room pressing against her ribs. Willy's voice promised resurrection, eternal life, glory in the skies. But here was bone and muscle cooling into a stiff corpse. The gap between his words and his reality yawned like a canyon. I can't keep working here, Dawn said. I hear Willy on those TVs telling everyone they'll rise into glory, but in here, she gestured to the sheet covered form, in here there's just eerie silence. You can't quit now, Alan said. You still want to attend that school, don't you? Yes, but then breathe. We'll do this together. Would you want your caregivers to just abandon you when your time comes? Dawn stared at the sheet draped form, imagining herself inert and alone. She shook her head. Together, they lifted Reuben's stiff body onto a rolling cart and headed for the service elevator. While they waited for the doors to open, Willy's voice filtered from a nearby television. The dead in Christ shall rise first. Dawn shuddered. Ever find bodies missing from the morgue? She asked, half serious. Ellen caught the direction of her gaze toward the TV and gave a soft, wry laugh. Every faith is born of fear, fear of death, fear of meaninglessness. Religion hands us a story to hold on to when darkness settles in. The elevator chimed. They rolled the cart inside, the sheet fluttering. Dawn inhaled the metallic odor of sanitary wipes and braced for the heavier scent awaiting them in the morgue. Together, they wheeled the cart through long basement corridors where old bulbs overhead flickered like dying stars. Back on the ward an hour later, Dawn scrubbed her hands raw beneath a stream of hot water. The head nurse peered around the corner, checking her watch. Clock out and get some rest. You'll be no good to anyone dead on your feet. Dawn nodded, physically and emotionally exhausted. She retrieved her jacket from the break room and stepped into the courtyard, where a bright moon hovered above cedar branches. Alan waited by the gate, backpack slung over one arm. Long night, he said. Come on, let's get out of here. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the usual turnaround point. I might as well tell you. I figured out your secret, Alan said. Why didn't you just tell me that Willy Briggs is your dad? Dawn started. You knew? How? You acted so strange whenever Willy was on TV, so I did a little research into which homes are in this area. I put two and two together. Will you let me walk you the rest of the way? Dawn shrugged, blushing with embarrassment. Okay, let's keep walking. As they approached the gate of the Briggs mansion, the motion-activated floodlights lit up the driveway and the massive entry gate. Alan paused to admire the perfectly manicured hedges on either side of it. That's your house, he said, nodding toward the mansion, illuminated by the moon. That's crazy. And your dad makes you work at a nursing home for $1 above minimum wage? I don't want to talk about it, Dawn said. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't judge me by my father's sermons. Alan regarded her, moonlight reflecting in his eyes. Only if you don't judge me for being Jewish. He held up his hands as if giving himself up. Tell your dad I had nothing to do with killing Jesus. And just for the record, Jesus was a Jew. Dawn laughed, startled by how much lighter she suddenly felt. For the first time in weeks, her father's voice loosened its grip on her mind. Alan had done what Willy never could, turned faith into something human, something shared, instead of something wielded like a weapon. She exhaled, a laugh slipping free, pure relief. She didn't have to pretend anymore, at least not in front of Alan. You know, I think it's cool that you're working at the nursing home, he said. You don't let anyone crush your dreams, not even someone as powerful as Willy Briggs. I think you're amazing. Thank you. They embraced, an unspoken pact of empathy passing between them. She watched Alan stride away, then slipped through the gate, each step echoing up the quiet drive. That was the end of chapter 9 of Double Lives.